Before the dealer even spreads the flop, the hand is already alive. Chips are in. Everyone is committed. There is no easing into the action, no careful pre-flop trimming of ranges. The game begins in the middle of the storm. A full board appears, stacks lean forward, and the usual pre-flop roadmap is gone. What remains is structure, awareness, and the ability to stay steady while the pot swells faster than expected. In this session, we are stepping directly into $1, $3 live bomb pots and slowing them down on purpose. We will break apart 4-card and 5-card Omaha hands that are forced to the flop and see how equities stretch and compress when everyone shares the same starting point. We will sort through double board formats, where one strong hand is rarely enough, and compare pot limit to no limit structures, where bet sizing changes the entire emotional temperature of the table. Board texture will take center stage. So will stack depth, position, and the subtle shifts in confidence that happen when several players connect at once. The goal is not to chase the chaos. It is to build a repeatable framework that keeps you grounded when the action accelerates. Bomb pots reward clarity more than bravery. When the room goes quiet and the pot is already large, your edge comes from knowing what matters and what does not. So we will move deliberately. No rushing. No dramatic swings in tone. Just a calm walk through crowded flops, split boards and inflated pots, one careful decision at a time. Chapter 1. Structural Foundations of Bomb Pots. When you sit down at a table and hear someone call for a bomb pot, you're stepping into a different kind of poker hand. Before any cards hit the felt, every player at the table puts in a predetermined ante. It's not like a regular hand, where only the blinds post money and the rest of the table waits to act. Here, nobody gets to fold preflop. Once that ante is in, you're in, no questions, no choices. In a standard Hold'em bomb pot, players get 2 whole cards. But in a 5-card double board bomb pot, every player gets 5 whole cards instead. That might sound like a small change, but it fundamentally alters the strength of every hand you're going to see. More cards in the hole means more combinations, more draws, and stronger made hands across the board. Nobody is starved for equity here. What makes the double board format even more distinct is that 2 separate boards are dealt. After the antes are posted and the 5 whole cards are out, the dealer runs 2 full boards simultaneously, each with its own flop, turn, and river. Players compete to make the best hand on each board independently, and the pot is split between the best hand on board 1 and the best hand on board 2. That means a single hand can be a winner, a loser, a scoop, or a chop, depending on how both boards run out. The hand construction rule is also different from Hold'em. Like Omaha, players must use exactly 2 of their 5 whole cards combined with exactly 3 community cards from the same board to form their best 5-card hand. You can't play the board, and you can't use only 1 whole card. That rule shapes everything about how you evaluate your hand, and ignoring it leads to costly mistakes at showdown. There's no pre-flop betting in bomb pots. After the whole cards are dealt, the boards come out immediately, and the action begins on the flop. The first active player to the left of the dealer button acts first, and from there each board plays out like a standard post-flop round. This structure means the pot is already much bigger than usual, before anyone's even seen a board card. The stakes are set, and you're already involved. Because there's no pre-flop betting, you don't get the usual information about who's strong or weak before the flop. You can't read into raises or limps, because they never happened. You're forced to make decisions on the flop, with no pre-flop context, and with 5 whole cards giving everyone a wide range of possible holdings, showdowns can look very different from what you expect. With all those players in, and each one holding 5 cards, the probability of strong hands increases significantly. In standard hold'em with 2 whole cards, the chance to make a flush runs around 3%, and a straight just under 5%. With 5 whole cards and Omaha-style hand construction, those probabilities climb sharply, and the chance of multiple players holding flushes, straights, or full houses on the same board goes up alongside them. That's what equity overlap means in practice. Several players end up with hands that are close in strength, or in some cases identical, all fighting for the same half of the pot. The more players there are, the more likely it is that somebody hits something big. And when that happens, the pot size grows because people are willing to put chips in with stronger hands and bigger draws. That's what drives the high variance in bomb pots. You'll see big swings. Sometimes the pot goes to someone who scooped both boards. Other times, it gets chopped into small pieces across multiple winners. The swings can feel dramatic, especially if you're used to the slower pace and smaller pots of regular play. Another major difference in bomb pots is the way stack sizes relate to the pot. In regular hands, there's a chance to build the pot gradually, and the stack-to-pot ratio, what people call SPR, tends to be higher. That means you've got more room to maneuver, and you're less likely to be forced all in early. In bomb pots, all that forced money up front means the pot is already big compared to everyone's stack. For example, if you're playing a 1-3 game and each player antes $15 with 8 players at the table, the pot is already over $100 before a single board card hits. By the time the flop lands, you might be looking at a pot that's close to a third or more of most players' stacks. That compressed SPR changes how you have to think about commitment. With a lower SPR, you're often facing decisions for your whole stack much sooner. You can't hang back and wait for the nuts every time. Sometimes the structure forces you to go with a strong hand or a powerful draw, even if it's not the stone-cold nuts. In a normal hand, you might fold a marginal holding to a lot of action, but in a bomb pot, you'll often need to commit with hands that play well against a wide range. Understanding SPR in this context is critical. If you misjudge how committed you are to the pot, you can end up folding too often or calling off with the wrong hands. And because the pot is split between 2 boards, you also have to factor in what each half of the pot is worth compared to what you're risking. Winning one board might not justify a huge investment if the other board is a likely loss. The best way to stay disciplined in bomb pots is to set your expectations from the start. Accept that you'll face bigger pots and bigger swings. Know that you'll have to make tough choices for your stack sooner than you're used to. And remember that every player is in the same boat, dealing with the same forced bets, the same 5 whole cards, and the same lack of preflop information. When you get used to these differences, bomb pots start to feel less intimidating. They become another part of the game, with their own rhythm and their own set of decisions. Every hand is a new puzzle, shaped by the structure and the action that follows. If you take your time and trust your understanding of the fundamentals, those wild pots can start to make sense, and you'll find yourself handling the chaos with a calmer mind. Chapter 2: 4-card versus 5-card bomb pots. When you sit down for a bomb pot and see 5 cards instead of 4, the landscape really shifts. Let's start by thinking about what that 5th card does to the way your hand interacts with the board. In a 4-card game, you might find yourself holding a couple of cards that work well together, and a couple that do not. With 5 cards, everything starts to link up more often. Gaps fill in, and it gets much easier for your hand to connect with the flop in multiple ways. This is where wrap draws start to show up a lot more. A wrap is just a straight draw that covers many possible runouts, often using 3 or even 4 cards from your hand. In a 4-card bomb pot, you might see wraps here and there, but in a 5-card game it feels like someone has won almost every hand. That extra card just creates so many more combinations that can catch a piece of the board and threaten to make a straight. It is not just that there are more wraps. The wraps themselves are usually stronger. Instead of looking at a standard open-ended straight draw, you are facing hands that can hit a straight in several different ways, sometimes with as many as 20 outs or more depending on the board. This means that when you flop what looks like a strong hand, you have to be aware that the odds of someone having a massive draw are much higher than before. Think about how these wraps compress equities. When every player is drawing to big hands, and the board is so connected, it gets harder to hold on to the best hand through the turn and river. You might start with an advantage, but the likelihood that someone will catch up or even leap ahead grows with every additional out in play. The whole table's range starts to overlap because those 5-card hands just reach so many different parts of the board. This is why you really cannot ignore the possibility of strong draws in 5-card bomb pots. You will see more action, more big bets, and more players willing to push the pot because they know how many outs they might have. If you are not careful, you can get caught up in these situations thinking you are ahead, only to find out that you are facing a wrap with redraws behind it. That is a big shift from the 4-card game, where the board and the hands do not connect quite as often or as explosively. Now, let's talk about how redraws and nut potential start to shape the way you play when you are holding 5 cards. With that extra card in your hand, it becomes pretty common to see hands that not only make something strong right away, but also have ways to improve further. You might have a straight, but your opponent could have the same straight with a flush draw or the possibility to make a full house. It is not unusual for someone to have the current nuts and still be drawing for an even better hand. This is what people mean when they talk about redraw culture in 5-card bomb pots. It is not enough to make the nuts on the flop or the turn, because there could be several ways for that nut hand to get beaten as more cards come down. When you know the chance of hitting a flush with a standard 9-out draw is around 19% on the next card, and players are holding more cards that can give them even more outs, you see how quickly the landscape can change. The focus starts to shift away from just the current strength of your hand to your ability to improve to the absolute best possible hand. That is nut potential, and it matters more in 5-card bomb pots than almost anywhere else. If you are up against a board where a lot of turn cards can change the nuts, you want to be the player who has a way to redraw to the next best thing, or at least block someone else from getting there. You will also find that redraws make it harder to price out your opponents. Even when you have a strong made hand, if your opponent has both a draw and a redraw, they often still have enough equity to continue. This is why evaluating nut potential and blocking power becomes so important. You need to know not just what you have, but what you might become, and what your opponents can become as well. As you move from 4-card to 5-card bomb pots, the discipline needed to navigate these situations really ramps up. Hands that might have been solid in a 4-card game, like 2-pair or even bottom set, can lose value fast in 5-card because the board is so much more likely to connect with your opponent's ranges. Remember, in a standard hold'em hand played to the river, the probability of ending up with 2-pair is around 23%, and with a pocket pair, you will make a set or better by the river roughly 1 time in 5. When everyone at the table is holding 5 cards, those percentages shift upward, and the chance that someone has hit something big or is drawing to it goes way up. This is why you have to be more selective with your hand choices in 5-card bomb pots. Medium strength hands, those that might look okay in a 4-card game, are much more likely to be dominated or outdrawn. The overlap between hands is just too high. Equity compression makes it so that even if you start with a small edge, it can disappear quickly as the pot builds and more cards come out. You really want to focus on hands that can make the nuts, have redraws to the nuts, or block your opponents from getting there. Aggression still has its place, but it needs to be backed up by the right kind of hand. You cannot just push chips in and hope that your two-pair or weak straight will hold up. There are too many ways for opponents to catch up, and too many hands that look similar to yours but with extra outs or redraws behind them. It is not about playing scared, but about playing structured and aware. The more cards in play, the more likely it is that someone has a hand that can challenge yours on any street. When you look at 5-card bomb pots through this lens, you start to see why a disciplined approach is so essential. It is about knowing when your hand is vulnerable, when you need to back off, and when you have the kind of nut potential or redraw power to justify putting chips in. The game rewards those who can think ahead, anticipate the ways the board can develop, and adjust their strategy to fit the denser, more connected ranges at play. If you take your time, pay attention to the extra draw possibilities, and tighten up your hand selection, you will find yourself more comfortable in these aggressive, high-action games. The edges may be thin, but with patience and discipline, you can find the right spots to lean in and the right moments to step back. The key is to let the structure of the game guide your choices, always keeping an eye on how the extra card changes the possibilities and the pressure at the table. Chapter 3. Board Texture as Primary Filter. You sit down to a bomb pot, and the dealer spreads out the boards. Before you even peek at your own hand, your eyes should go straight to those community cards. You've already got 2 separate boards to read, and each one tells a different story. Every decision you make, every chip you put in, should be filtered through what those cards actually mean for the whole table on each board. Let's slow down and walk through how board texture shapes your thinking from the flop onward in these multi-way pots. When you see a board that feels dry, you'll notice there's not much linking the cards together. Maybe the suits are scattered and the values are spaced out. There's no easy flush draw. The cards don't connect to make straights. On these kinds of boards, there just are not many ways for somebody to have a big draw or a made monster right away. Most players miss, and the hands that do connect are usually high card pairs or an overpair. In bomb pots, this means the pot often stays smaller, and whoever is willing to show some aggression can take it down more often. If you find yourself on a dry board, it's worth remembering that the value of top pair or an overpair tends to rise. There's just less that can beat you, and not much that can catch up on later streets. You'll also see that aggression works more reliably here, since your opponents are less likely to have a hand that can call you down. There's less incentive for someone to chase, because the board just does not help them. That lets you bet with a wider range, even with hands that might seem marginal in other spots. Dry boards also tend to keep the pecking order of hand strengths pretty stable from the flop all the way to the river. If you're ahead now, you're likely to stay ahead. You can let that steady feeling guide your bet sizing and your willingness to push the action. When you spot a dry texture, adjust your expectations for action and hand values accordingly. Now, things start to shift when the board is coordinated. Here you'll see cards that are close in rank, maybe grouped by suit, and they open up all kinds of possibilities for straight and wrap draws. The connectivity between the cards means there are more ways for players to have strong draws, sometimes multiple draws at once. In bomb pots, this kind of board is a magnet for action, because so many hands can find a reason to continue. On coordinated boards, you have to respect the power of those wrap draws and combo draws we talked about, Even if you're holding what looks like a decent made hand, you might be up against players with 20 or more outs to improve. The likelihood that someone has a draw goes up, and the chance that the best hand on the flop will still be best by the river goes down. You'll see more chips flying around, and pots can grow fast as players with strong draws lean into aggression. Because coordinated boards are so dynamic, your aggression frequency should drop if you're holding only a medium-strength hand. The danger of being outdrawn or dominated is just too high. It's not enough to have top pair or even two pair if the board is screaming for straights and flushes. Take a breath and remember that your hand's value is being squeezed. What looked strong on a dry board might be in real trouble here. If you're facing a coordinated texture, you want to be much more selective about when you push chips in. The board is working against you, not just against your opponents. Pots get bigger and the swings get wider because so many hands are live. Pay close attention to how many ways the cards can interact and realize that your equity can change in a hurry. Let's talk about paired and monotone boards, since they each bring their own flavor to bomb pots. When the board pairs up, meaning two cards share the same rank, you have to start thinking about full houses and trips. That little pair on the board opens up a world of possibilities for someone to have three of a kind, or even a full house if they started with a pocket pair among their 5 cards. Even at a baseline, that kind of holding shows up more often than people expect, and in a bomb pot with the whole table involved, it comes into play on paired boards more than you'd think. Paired boards tighten things up. They make people nervous about betting without a strong hand. If the board is paired and also has some coordination, meaning there are straight or flush possibilities too, then aggression drops even more. People get cautious because the chance of running into a monster goes way up. You might see more checking and smaller bets as players try to control the pot size and avoid running into trips or a full house. Monotone flops bring a different kind of tension. When all 3 flop cards share the same suit, the threat of a flush is immediate. With 5 whole cards to choose from, and the Omaha rule requiring exactly 2 of them, anyone holding 2 suited cards in that suit already has a flush on the flop. If you're not holding a flush yourself, your hand's value drops sharply. Even strong hands like sets or 2 pair are suddenly vulnerable. Players tend to check more and bet smaller because nobody wants to run into the nuts. You'll see a lot of defensive play, and pots can shrink as people wait to see what others will do. On monotone flops, you have to be careful with hands that would normally be strong. Non-flush hands just do not play well here, and you should be ready to slow down unless you're drawing 2 or already holding the non-flush. Bet sizings get smaller, and it's common to see more checking as players try to control the damage and avoid getting trapped. Now here is where the double board adds another layer. Both boards rarely share the same texture. One might be dry, while the other is connected. One might be monotone, while the other is paired. That means you are often managing 2 completely different strategic situations at the same time. Your hand might be strong on one board and weak on the other, and the aggression level that's correct on one side can be exactly wrong on the other. You have to read each board on its own terms before you decide how much of your stack to commit. All of this brings us back to one core habit: the boards come first. Before you get attached to your own cards, run your eyes across what's in the middle on both sides. Is a board dry, giving you a chance to push with a wider range? Is it coordinated, demanding respect for all those draws? Is it paired or monotone, signaling danger and the need for caution? When you use board texture as your main filter on each board independently, every decision you make will be grounded in what the entire table is working with, not just your own hand. Let the cards on the felt tell you how to play. When you set your mind to reading the boards first, you'll find yourself making better, calmer decisions, no matter what you're holding. The texture of the board is the real story in a bomb pot, and it's always worth listening closely before you act. Take your time, let your thoughts settle, and let the boards be your guide. Chapter 4: Introduction to Double Board Dynamics. By now you know the lay of the land. 2 boards, 2 separate contests, pot split between whoever wins each side. What that structure actually means for your decision-making is what this chapter is about. Because once you understand that the pot always gets divided, you start to see that not all wins are created equal. Some hands put you in a position to take everything. Others just get you a share, and some put you in spots where a share of a share is all you walk away with. Let's start with the baseline. When you win one board and lose the other, you're taking half the pot. In a multi-way hand with significant antes, that might feel okay, but it rarely is. Rake comes out of the full pot. Your share of the antes is gone. If you're consistently targeting only one board, you're grinding for half-pot wins while still absorbing the full cost of entry every hand. That's not how you build a stack. The players who come out ahead in double board games are the ones who put themselves in scoop spots, not split spots. Scooping means winning both boards outright. That's your best possible outcome on any hand, and it's what you should be orienting your decisions toward. When you scoop, you take the entire pot, all the antes, all the action. That's when the structure of the bomb pot really pays off. The big pots that build up in these games are most valuable to whoever can claim both sides. On the other end of that is quartering, and it's worth understanding exactly what it means. Quartering happens when you tie with an opponent on one board, while that same opponent wins the other board outright. When that occurs, the pot gets divided like this. Your opponent wins half the pot from board 2, then you split the remaining half from board 1, leaving you with a quarter of the total. You can play correctly, make a strong hand, and still walk away with a fraction of what you put in. Straights are a common example. If you and an opponent make the same straight on one board, and that opponent holds something better than you on the other, they get 3/4 of the pot, and you get 1. That's a rough way to lose a hand you thought you won. Certain hands are more vulnerable to this than others. If your holding is only genuinely competitive on one board, you're exposed. You might win your half, but if an opponent has the same hand there and something stronger on the other side, you've been quartered before you even realize it. The more your hand leans on a single board and has nothing going on the other, the more likely you are to end up in one of these costly situations. This is why 2-board equity matters so much. The best hands in this format aren't just strong on one board. They're hands that have live draws, nut potential, or real interaction with both runouts simultaneously. When you look at your 5-hole cards on the flop, you need to be asking how they connect with each board independently. If one board is lighting up and the other is dark, take note. That's a hand that can win half. A hand that has paths forward on both boards is a hand that can scoop. This concept is sometimes called scoop equity. It's the share of the full pot you can expect to win over time, accounting for both boards. A hand that wins one board half the time and the other board half the time has strong scoop equity. A hand that dominates one board but has no play on the other has weak scoop equity, even if it looks impressive at first glance. When you're evaluating whether a hand is worth committing to, scoop equity is the lens you want to use. As the hand develops past the flop, your equity picture on each board shifts. A strong-made hand on one side, with a live draw on the other, is the position you want to be in. That combination keeps your scoop potential alive while giving you a floor of at least half if the draw doesn't come in. The hands that feel most powerful in this format are the ones where both boards are working for you at the same time, even if in different ways. Playability ties into this too. Some hands that look strong on paper are actually rigid. They need a specific texture to perform, and if both boards don't cooperate, they're stuck. What you want are hands that stay flexible, ones that have multiple ways to improve and interact with a range of board combinations. The more your hand can adapt to what's in the middle on both sides, the more consistently you'll find yourself in scoop territory, rather than split or quarter territory. Disciplined hand selection becomes even more important when you factor in the compressed SPR we covered earlier. With stacks committing faster and pots growing quickly, the cost of being quartered is amplified. You're putting in a large share of your stack, chasing a quarter return. When the pots are small, quartering stings. When the pots are big, it can be a session-defining mistake. So when you look down at your 5 cards in a double-board bomb pot, let scoop equity be your filter. Ask yourself if both boards have life for your hand. Ask yourself if you're set up to compete on each side, or just hoping to escape with half. The more you build that habit, the fewer times you'll find yourself chopping up a small slice of a pot you helped build. Slow down, look at both sides, and play for the whole thing. Chapter 5: The Scoop Mindset in Double Board. It's easy to sit down at the table and focus on one board at a time, especially if you're coming from single board games. But if you're looking to thrive in double board bomb pots, you'll need to adjust your thinking. Every decision starts with recognizing which hands can actually scoop, meaning they can win both boards outright. That's where the biggest value comes from, and it's not as common as you might hope. So let's talk about how to spot those scoop candidates, and why your hand selection should always be aiming for that full pot. When you're dealt your cards, start by asking how likely your hand is to make something strong on both boards. In double-board PLO bomb pots, the hands that really shine are the ones that can play well across 2 completely different runouts. Suited aces and double-suited high pairs are the classic examples, because they threaten to make big hands like flushes or sets on either board. Now, flushes are rare in 7-card games, less than 4% of the time in fact. But if you hold suited aces, you can threaten the nut flush on both boards, and that's exactly the kind of upside you want. Another angle is set mining. Flopping a set with a pocket pair happens about once every 8.5 times. While that's not frequent, if your pair is high and you've got backup draws or suitedness, you're not just hoping for one board, you're set up to compete for both. So hands that can make strong 5-card holdings on both runouts, or have several ways to improve, are what you want to be playing. It's not just about what you have right now, either. Think about your equity if you're behind. In a 6-handed bomb pot, a hand that's only behind about 12% of the time and holds around 43% equity when it's not ahead is a premium. That means it's rarely dominated, and even when it is, it's got a real shot to catch up. That's the kind of scoop equity you should be looking for. If your hand only has playability on one board, or if you're relying on a single weak draw, you're just not in a position to scoop. Combo draws are another big piece of the puzzle. If you're holding a hand that can make the nuts on one board and a strong draw on the other, you're in a great spot to pressure opponents and threaten the full pot. The more ways your hand can win, or at least have significant equity on both boards, the better your chances of scooping. That's why discipline is so important here. You want to consistently pass on hands that can only win half, and focus on those that can win both. Now, let's talk about the traps. One of the biggest mistakes players make is getting attached to a hand that's only strong on one board. Maybe you flop the nuts on one runout, but you're drawing dead on the other. It feels tempting to stay in, especially if you're holding something like top set or a flush draw. But in double board bomb pots, that's a dangerous mindset. If you're only ever competing for half the pot, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The risk comes from investing more chips when your equity is capped. Sure, you might have 6 combinations of pocket aces, but if those aces are only good on one board, you're not much better off than someone drawing to a split. Out is a word you'll hear a lot. Any unseen card that can improve your hand on a later street. But if you don't have outs on both boards, you're just not in a profitable spot. It's a common scenario. Someone flops the nuts on one board and a weak draw or nothing at all on the other. They keep calling or betting, hoping to salvage half the pot. Over time, though, this approach just bleeds chips. The numbers show it. Drawing to weak hands with limited equity on one or both boards leads to poor results over the long run. It's also why folding the nuts on one board can be completely reasonable when you've got no shot on the other. If your hand doesn't have a chance to scoop or at least lock up one board and compete for the other, it's often best to let it go. Sometimes players convince themselves that winning half is enough, especially in multi-way pots. But the risk-reward just isn't there. Non-nut draws and medium-strength hands might look decent, but unless you can reduce the field or improve your scoop potential, you're better off folding. That's the discipline you need, passing up those half-pot traps and waiting for the hands that can actually take it all. Now let's dig into redraw equity, because this is where a lot of the real decision-making happens. Redraws are all about your ability to improve on future streets, and in double board bomb pots, you need that potential on both boards. If you flop a big hand on one board but only have a weak pair on the other, you're at risk of splitting. But if you've got strong redraws, like an open-ended straight draw on one board and a flush draw on the other, you're building in ways to scoop even if you're not ahead right now. A standard flush draw gives you about a 1 in 5 shot to hit on the next card, which is meaningful when you're looking for improvement. Full houses are even rarer, showing up less than 3% of the time in 7-card games. But when you pair up strong-made hands with live draws across both boards, you create pressure and keep real equity in play. Think about a spot where you flop quads on one board and an open-ended straight draw on the other. That's a dream scenario. You can bet aggressively, knowing you're locked up on one side and still have outs to scoop on the other. The more often your hand can strengthen by the river on both boards, the more justified you are in continuing. That's the essence of evaluating redraw equity. How many ways can this hand improve, and how does that translate into scoop potential? Position matters here too. When you're last to act, you can see how the field reacts and decide whether your redraws are likely to hold up. If you're facing just one opponent, it's easier to gauge whether your equity is enough to keep going. But the key is always to weigh not just your current strength, but also your future possibilities on both boards. That's the mindset shift that separates strong double board players from the rest. Instead of chasing halves or hoping for splits, you're always thinking in terms of the whole pot. You look for hands that can win outright, or at least give you multiple paths to improvement on both runouts. When you do find yourself with only limited equity, you let it go and wait for a better spot. Over time, this approach pays off. You'll find yourself folding more often in marginal spots, but when you do play, you're playing for the full reward. The patience and discipline to pass on weak scoop candidates, avoid half-pot traps, and value redraw equity across both boards is what leads to long-term success in this format. So take your time with each decision. Scan both boards, count your outs on each, and always ask yourself whether you're really in a position to scoop. Let the others chase halves while you wait for the chance to take it all. That's how you build the right habits and start seeing the game with a true scoop mindset. Chapter 6: Pot Limit versus No Limit Bomb Pots. When you sit down for a bomb pot, and you know it's going to be pot limit, you can almost feel it in the way people settle into their chairs. The pace is steadier. Everyone knows the biggest bet anyone can make is tied to what's already in the middle, and that's a powerful kind of safety net. Imagine you're eyeing the stacks, thinking about the action, and you realize no one can just shove in their whole stack out of nowhere. That does something to the way folks play. They take more time. They call a bit more comfortably. They're willing to see another card, knowing the next bet can't suddenly balloon out of control. Pot limit rules mean that the maximum anyone can bet or raise is the size of the pot at that moment, counting all money in the middle, plus any outstanding bets and calls. That's it. You can't just drop your whole stack in and force everyone to fold or call for all their chips. That restriction keeps things from spiraling. It's not just about saving money. It's about knowing how much risk you're facing at any moment. When you're thinking about bluffing or value betting, you're working inside these boundaries. You know that if you call this street, you won't have to face a bet that's 5 times the pot on the next one. That predictability lets you plan your hands out more carefully, and it gives you the room to play more streets. Because the stakes grow in a measured way, you see more players sticking around. Folks don't fold as quickly to pressure, because the pressure can only get so high. That means you'll get more multi-way pots, and you'll see more hands go deeper into the post-flop streets. The game becomes about navigating those later decisions, not just surviving a huge shove. It's a more strategic, more thoughtful kind of poker. You're not just trying to dodge a wrecking ball every hand. You're thinking about how to build a pot, how to manage your stack, and how to set up bets that tell a story across multiple streets. The containment of pot limit lets you take calculated risks. You might chase a draw a little more often, knowing you won't be punished with a sudden massive bet. You might float a street or two, thinking you can outplay someone later. That's the gift of this structure. It gives you a sense of control, and it lets the hand breathe. The pots still get big, but they get there one step at a time. That's why you'll hear players say pot limit is a more measured environment. It's not that people don't make mistakes. It's just that the mistakes usually cost less, and the game itself feels more like a series of choices rather than one big gamble. Now, let's talk about what happens when you open up the cage and play no limit. Suddenly, the whole dynamic shifts. You can bet anything in front of you at any time. If you want to slide your entire stack into the middle, you can. That freedom changes the way people think. It puts real weight on every decision. Instead of knowing that the biggest bet is tied to the pot, you're always aware that someone could put you to the test for everything you've got. This creates leverage. When someone bets the pot, you're already facing a big decision. But if they shove for 3 times the pot, you're staring down the possibility of losing your whole stack right now. That's a different kind of pressure. It's not just math anymore. It's psychology. Players start thinking about what it means to be all in. They wonder if they really want to risk it all on one hand, or if they should wait for a better spot. That fear of elimination, or just the pain of a big loss, creeps into every call and raise. In no-limit bomb pots, you'll see bigger bets, and you'll see them sooner. Overbets become a tool. If you think your opponent is weak, you can push them off a hand with a huge wager. If you've got the nuts, you can try to get paid the maximum by putting someone to the test for all their chips. Stack depth matters more than ever. When you've got a deep stack, you have more tools to apply pressure. When you're short, you know you could be at risk any time the action comes to you. The volatility goes up in no limit. Pots can balloon quickly. One big hand can wipe out half your stack or double you up. The threat of the all-in hangs over every street, and that makes people play differently. Some folks tighten up, folding hands they might have called with in pot limit. Others get aggressive, using the threat of elimination to bully the table. It's a more dangerous game, and it rewards those who can keep their nerve under fire. The real key difference between these structures comes down to commitment logic. That's the process you use to decide when you're willing to risk a big chunk of your stack. In pot limit, you've got more time to make that decision. The bets grow in steps, and you can usually wait until the turn or river before you have to put in a lot of chips. That lets you gather more information, see how the board develops, and watch how your opponents act before you commit. No limit changes that timeline. You might face an all-in on the flop, or even before. Sometimes you have to make a huge decision with only a little information. That means you need to know ahead of time what hands you're willing to go broke with, and which hands you're ready to let go. The threshold for commitment is different. You can't always count on seeing the next card before the big bets come in. Because the commitment points come earlier in no limit, you have to be more disciplined. If you're not sure you want to go all the way with your hand, it might be better to fold sooner rather than get trapped in a spot where you're facing an all-in. On the other hand, if you've got a strong draw or a big made hand, you might need to be ready to call off your stack much earlier than you would in pot limit. Players who understand these thresholds avoid the most painful mistakes. In pot limit, you might lose a few bets if you misjudge a situation, but you won't usually lose your whole stack in one go. In no limit, a single misstep can cost you everything you've built. That's why commitment logic is so important. You're not just thinking about the hand in front of you. You're thinking about how the structure shapes the pressure points, and you're making your decisions with that in mind. So as you take your seat for the next bomb pot, pay attention to the structure. Notice how pot limit lets you plan, breathe, and navigate through each street, while no limit demands quick, decisive action and the nerve to put it all on the line. The rules shape the risks, and the risks shape the game. If you stay aware of how commitment works in each format, you'll find yourself making better decisions, feeling less rushed, and maybe even enjoying the tension that comes from knowing exactly what's at stake. Let the chips move at their own pace, and let your choices follow the rhythm of the game. The structure is always talking to you, if you're willing to listen closely. Chapter 7: Multiway Discipline and Population Tendencies. You will see it time and again at the 1-3 tables. Players watch the dealer spread out that big bomb pot and get drawn in by the size of the prize. 2 pair comes along, or maybe a straight that's not quite the nuts, and suddenly chips are flying into the middle. That feeling is understandable. 2 pair is not rare, but it feels strong because you see it much more in bomb pots than in regular hands. The truth is, though, that 2 pair just does not hold the same weight when 6 or 7 people see the flop together. The reason comes down to structure. In these bomb pots, the pot is already huge compared to the stacks, and everyone has a hand. So, when you make 2 pair, there's a good chance someone else has a set or a higher 2 pair. You are not just up against one range, but a whole table's worth of possible hands. That means your 2 pair is much more vulnerable than it looks. Weak straights too. often seem like big hands, but in bomb pots, they are often the third or fourth strongest straight possible on the board. If you are facing heat from more than one direction, that should ring alarm bells. A lot of 1-3 regulars get caught up in the moment. The pot is big, the action feels fast, and folding 2 pair just does not feel right. But the math is not on their side. With so many hands in play, the chances that someone has a bigger piece of the board go way up. It is not just about what your hand is, but what it is up against. When you see players stacking off with 2 pair on a coordinated board, you are watching a structural mistake in action. They are treating their hand like it is heads up, when it is anything but. This is where discipline comes in. It is not easy to let go of a hand that feels strong, especially when there is already so much money out there. But if you can recognize when your hand is likely crushed, you will save yourself from the slow bleed that eats up so many stacks in these games. Sometimes the best way to win is to not lose more than you have to. When a lot of players are going for it, and you are holding 2 pair or a non-nut straight, you do not need to be a hero. The profit comes from folding, when most players cannot. You will notice that the players who consistently win in these bomb pots are not the ones who always push 2 pair. They are the ones who can sigh, muck their cards, and wait for a better spot. Letting others overcommit, with hands that look good but play poorly against a field, is a habit that pays off over time. That kind of patience is not flashy, but it builds stacks quietly. Now, let's talk about draws. In these loose 1-3 bomb pots, you will see players chasing every kind of draw under the sun. The pot is big, the action is loose, and even with just 4 outs, people cannot resist putting in more chips. That gut shot straight draw feels like it is worth taking a shot, but the real odds are not so friendly. When your draw is not to the nuts, you are sometimes drawing to a hand that still loses even when it gets there. And if you do hit, there is still a decent chance someone else has made a better hand. This is what draw inflation looks like. The pot is inflated, so the perceived value of every draw goes up in people's minds. They see the big pot and think, maybe this is the time it pays off. But in reality, those draws are not as valuable as they seem, especially when you are up against a crowd of players who might have bigger draws or even made hands already. When your draw is not to the nuts, you are sometimes drawing dead, and if you do hit, there is still a decent chance someone else has made a better hand. Redraws are another thing to keep in mind. If you have a straight draw but no flush redraw, or you are drawing to a weak flush with no straight outs, your equity is much lower than you think. The best draws in these games are to the nuts, and ideally come with backup, like a straight draw plus a flush draw. If you are sitting there with a single marginal draw, and no outs to improve beyond that, you are often better off letting it go. Players who can resist draw inflation and only go after the best spots will find themselves in much stronger positions. You do not need to chase every draw, especially not in these multi-way pots, where the odds are stacked against you. Waiting for those times when you have the nut draw or a combo draw with real chances to improve gives you a big edge over the field. It is about selectivity. The more you can avoid getting sucked into the action with weak draws, the more you will keep your stack healthy and ready for the right moment. So, how do you know when to get involved and when to sit tight? That depends a lot on the table you are at. Some tables are passive. People are just checking and calling, not putting much pressure on. At other tables, the aggression is turned up, and there are bets and raises flying around almost every hand. Each of these environments asks for a different approach. At a passive table, you will often get to see cards for cheap, even in multi-way pots. That means you can wait for the right hands and realize your equity without having to risk your whole stack. There is no need to force the issue. You can let the action come to you, and when you do make a big hand, you will often get paid off because people are not folding much. The danger, though, is in getting tempted to play too many hands just because it is cheap. Staying disciplined and only playing for real structural advantages will keep you out of trouble. Aggressive tables are a different animal. Here, you will need to tighten up and be ready to fold hands that might look good at first glance. People are betting big and often, and the cost of chasing with weak hands or draws goes up fast. If you try to fight fire with fire, using marginal holdings, you will get burned. Instead, focus on picking your spots. Wait for a hand that can stand up to multiple streets of aggression, and do not be afraid to let go when things get out of hand. The players who do best at these tables are the ones who do not get sucked into every battle. They are patient, waiting for those moments when the structure of the board and the action line up in their favor. You will notice that at passive tables, the big winners are often the ones who play tight and capitalize on opponents sticking around with weak hands. At aggressive tables, though, it is the disciplined folders who come out ahead. They are the ones who do not mind letting go of two pair when the board gets scary, and who do not chase draws that are not worth the price. Learning to read the table and adjust your strategy is a skill that sets good players apart. It is not about always being tight or always being aggressive. It is about knowing when to wait and when to go for it. If the table is letting you see cards for cheap, you can be patient and wait for the nuts. If the table is wild, you need to tighten up and protect your stack. Letting the game slow down for you, even when things are moving fast around you, is one of the most valuable habits you can build. When you see others rushing in with hands that are not built to survive, you will know you can wait for your moment. The profit comes quietly, and the mistakes belong to those who cannot say no. That is where the edge lives, in the folds and the waits, not just the showdowns. Let the others chase. You will be there when it matters. Chapter 8. Redraws and Nut Protection. It's common to look down at a strong hand early in a bomb pot and feel that little surge of hope. You see something that looks like a winner, maybe a set or two pair, and you want to hang on for dear life. But in live 1-3 bomb pots, especially those with 5 cards or double boards, that kind of thinking can lead you into trouble. The truth is, having a made hand with no redraws is a lot riskier than it might seem at first glance. A redraw means you already have a decent hand, but you're still drawing to an even better one. Maybe you hit a straight on the turn, but you also have a flush draw in your back pocket. That flush draw is your redraw. It gives you another way to make the nuts if someone else catches up. When you hold a naked made hand, you don't have any of that safety net. Your only hope is that what you've got right now will hold up, but in these bomb pots, that's rarely a safe bet. The reason is simple. With so many players seeing the flop and so many cards in play, the chances someone is drawing to a better hand go way up. In a 5-card Omaha bomb pot, for example, every opponent has more possible combinations, more ways to catch up or pass you. Even if you flop a set or two pair, there's a good shot at least one player is drawing to a straight, a flush, or even a higher set. Each time a new community card comes out, the board changes, and your hand can slip from the lead to second or third place before you know it. That's why it's so important to pay attention to your backup equity. If you flop a hand that looks strong but realize you have no outs to improve, no chance to draw to a better straight, flush, or full house, then you're sitting on a naked made hand. In these multi-way high variance spots, you really don't want to overcommit with that kind of holding. It's tempting to hope your hand holds up, but the math just isn't on your side when so many outs are live for your opponents. Sometimes it feels like you're folding the winner, but over many sessions, the hands without redraws tend to underperform. The pots are big, the fields are wide, and you'll see a parade of turn and river cards that can wreck a hand that looked golden on the flop. Recognizing when you're holding a naked-made hand is a skill that will save you chips and headaches in the long run. Discipline in these spots is what keeps your bankroll steady in the face of so much chaos. Now, when you start looking for hands with layered equity, those with both a made hand and ways to improve, you'll notice a big difference in how you weather the swings. Let's talk about what happens when you combine a straight draw, sometimes called a wrap, with a flush draw. In 4-card and especially 5-card Omaha bomb pots, this combo is a real powerhouse. A wrap is a straight draw with more outs than the standard open-ended variety. If you have a wrap and a flush draw at the same time, you're sitting on the potential to make either the nut straight or the nut flush, depending on how the board unfolds. This is what people mean when they talk about combo draws, multiple ways to catch up or move ahead, even if you're behind on the flop. These hands are so valuable because every extra out you have makes it harder for someone else to fade you. Against a player with a naked set or 2 pair, your wrap plus flush draw can be a favorite or at least a coin flip to win by the river. You'll often find yourself in spots where you can call, raise, or even apply real pressure because your hand has so many ways to get there. If the turn blanks out one draw, you might still have another path to the nuts on the river. What's more, these combo draws provide resilience. If you're up against aggression, you're less likely to be pushed off your equity. The more ways you can improve, the more comfortable you'll feel absorbing heat from opponents who are betting their made hands. Even when you miss one draw, you're often not out of the running. That's the beauty of layered outs. They keep you alive and dangerous in pots that would otherwise be out of reach. In a 1-3 live 5-card Omaha bomb pot, making a habit of prioritizing hands with both a wrap and a flush draw will help stabilize your results. You won't win every hand, but over time you'll notice that you're less exposed to big swings. When you're behind, you're rarely drawing dead, and when you're ahead, you've got a cushion against being outdrawn yourself. That's a huge advantage in these wild multi-way games. Now, things get even more interesting when you move into double-board bomb pots. These games split the pot between 2 separate boards, so now you've got to think about your equity on both sides. The challenge here is that it's not enough to have nut potential on just one board if you're completely dead on the other. If you make the nuts on board 1, but have no redraws or live cards on board 2, you're often only playing for half the pot. Hands that have strong redraws on both boards are the real gold in these games. If you can make a straight or flush on one board and still have outs to improve on the other, you're in a position to scoop the entire pot, or at least secure a chop. That's important, because the swings in double-board bomb pots can be even bigger than in single-board games. The more balanced your redraws, the steadier your results will be over time. Sometimes, you'll find yourself holding a hand that's a monster on one board, but completely dead on the other. It's easy to get excited, but that lack of coverage can cost you. The best hands for these spots are the ones that give you live draws, or at least some chance to improve on both boards. This hedges your bets. It means you're less likely to get scooped, and more likely to walk away with at least half or all of the pot. In these double board games, you want to avoid the trap of focusing all your energy on one board. If you ignore the other, you'll find yourself missing out on value and exposing yourself to greater variance. Even an open-ended straight draw, which gives you about a 17% shot to hit on the next card, is better than nothing. Stack your hand with as many live paths as possible, on both boards, and you'll find those big swings start to even out. Disciplined hand selection is the thread running through all of this. When you're choosing hands before the flop, look for those that give you redraws, nut potential, and coverage across both boards when possible. It's not about chasing every pot. It's about picking your battles with hands that can stand up to the chaos of bomb pots. If you stick to that approach, you'll find yourself more comfortable, more in control, and less at the mercy of wild river cards. As the noise of chips and cards settles around you, let your mind settle too. Hold out for hands that offer backup plans and nut protection. Let go of the urge to chase with fragile-made hands. The patience to wait for redraws and the discipline to fold when you lack them will make the swings gentler and the game a whole lot more enjoyable. Let that steady confidence carry you as the next bomb pot begins. Chapter 9. Stack Depth Adjustments. When you sit down for a bomb pot and everyone's only got a shallow stack in front of them, the whole rhythm of the hand changes. There's less room to maneuver, and the choices you make right from the start carry a little more weight. The stack-to-pot ratio, or SPR, shrinks down, and that compresses the way decisions play out after the flop. You'll notice that people are more likely to get their chips in with hands like top pair or a strong draw, since there just isn't much depth to allow for slow playing or tricky lines. With less money behind, it's tough to justify chasing weaker draws. The reward for hitting a low-equity hand drops off fast, because you can't win a huge pot even if you get there. Think about it this way: your equity is really just your share of the pot over time, so if you're not getting paid off big when you hit, those long-shot calls stop being profitable. Shallow stacks make it so you need a cleaner connection to the board, especially in 4-card or 5-card Omaha bomb pots, where the pot is often multiway and the board changes fast. You'll also see that people are more likely to push the action when they've actually picked up a strong-made hand. There's less incentive to slow play, because if you wait too long, there might not be enough chips left to extract value. That means aggression ramps up and hands get played faster. The threshold for getting all in is actually lower than it would be with deeper stacks. With a small ratio of stack to pot, hands like 2-pair or a strong draw can often justify committing your chips. The math frequently supports getting it in rather than waiting. There is less room to maneuver, so decisions arrive sooner and with less margin for delay. When you're sitting on a short stack, you want to pay attention to how much of your stack is already in the pot. If you're already committed, the decision tree simplifies, and you're left with a pretty straightforward path. There's just not as much room for fancy moves or big bluffs, because the chips go in fast and the hand resolves quickly. It's a good idea to recognize when you're in one of these spots, where the stack-to-pot ratio just says, hey, this is the kind of hand where you're either going with it or you're getting out. Now, when the stacks get deeper, the whole vibe shifts. All of a sudden, you've got room to breathe, and that means the decisions you make can get a lot more complicated. There's more money behind, so the risk of making a big mistake goes up. You can't just rely on top pair or a decent draw to carry you through, because if you're wrong, you could be putting a huge chunk of your stack at risk. That's when you've really got to be careful about which hands you're willing to go the distance with. It's not just about the strength of your hand either. With deeper stacks, the threat of being outdrawn or running into a stronger holding gets magnified. You might have a decent hand now, but there's a lot more money left to play for, and that means your opponents can apply more pressure or hit their draws more profitably. The cost of an error is bigger, so you'll want to be more selective about stacking off, even with hands that might have been easy all-ins with a shorter stack. You'll find that patience starts to pay off when you've got those deeper stacks in play. There's no rush to build a massive pot with a marginal hand, because the downside is just too severe. Instead, you might want to manage the size of the pot and keep things under control, especially if someone else is showing aggression. It's common to see players tighten up their aggression in these spots, both before the flop and after, because the variance goes up and the swings get wider when there's more money in play. When you're facing a big bet or a raise in a deep stack bomb pot, you've got to think about your fold threshold. With more chips behind, you'll want to fold more often with medium-strength hands, rather than risk your whole stack on a marginal spot. It's a good habit to get into. Adjust your aggression and your willingness to call off your stack as the effective stacks grow. That way, you're not putting yourself in a position where one mistake costs you a session's worth of chips. Now let's talk about 5-card formats, because they bring a whole new layer to the way you think about stack depth. In 5-card Omaha bomb pots, the extra card means there are more ways to make strong hands and draws. When stacks are deep, implied odds become a huge part of your decision-making. All that really means is that the potential reward for hitting a big hand goes way up, because you can win a much bigger pot when you connect with the board in a big way. Speculative hands, those ones that might not look like much at first, but have the potential to turn into the nuts, start to shine when there's more money behind. You're not just thinking about the pot that's already out there. You're thinking about how much you can win if you hit your hand and your opponent is willing to pay you off. That's where implied odds come in, and they're especially valuable in these deep stack multi-way bomb pots. You've got to weigh the risk of chasing a draw against the chance to win a massive pot. Sometimes you'll find that it's worth calling with a draw that you'd have to fold in a shallow stack game, just because the upside is so much bigger. The key is to recognize when the potential for a big reward outweighs the immediate risk, particularly when you're up against several opponents. Those are the spots where you can justify taking a shot with a hand that has nut potential, knowing that if you hit, you'll be in line for a serious payoff. Another thing to keep in mind is that in Hold'em, where a player draws from 7 cards, the probability of making a straight is around 4.5%. In 5-card Omaha, where each player holds more whole cards and can form far more combinations, the probability of making a straight is considerably higher. That might not sound like a lot, but over time those draws can add up, especially when the stacks are deep and the pots get big. The more money that can go in after the flop, the more valuable those nut draws become. That's why you'll see players favor hands that can realize their equity against multiple opponents, rather than hands that are just hoping to squeak by with a weak top pair or a low flush. It's also true that in double-board 5-card bomb pots, deeper stacks increase the implied odds even further. Having 2 boards in play means there are more ways to connect, and if you've got a hand that can hit both, the reward profile goes up fast. The key is to lean toward ranges that have real connectivity across both boards, especially when there's a lot of money behind. So as you move from shallow stacks to deep stacks, keep your eyes on how the risk and reward shift. When you're short, you'll want to keep things simple and get it in with hands that have real equity. When you're deep, slow down, tighten up, and look for spots where the reward justifies the risk. Let your decisions breathe with the stack sizes, and you'll find that your approach starts to match the unique tempo of each bomb pot. Take a moment, look around the table, and notice those stacks. They're telling you how much space you've got to work with, how far you can push, and when it's time to let go. The right adjustments will help you stay balanced, steady, and ready for whatever the next hand brings. Chapter 10. Position and Information Flow. When you find yourself acting last in a big multi-way pot, you'll notice how much easier it is to make sense of what's happening around you. In these live bomb pots, especially at 1-3 tables where everyone throws in a mandatory ante, you'll often see 6, 8, sometimes even 10 players seeing the flop together. That much action can get messy fast. But if you're sitting in a late seat, you'll get to watch every other player act before it's your turn. You can see who's betting, who's just calling, and who's backing away. That's the kind of information you just can't get from early position. It's not just about watching for the big bets. You're paying attention to patterns, sizing, and timing. If you see the early players check, then someone in the middle fires out a bet, and another player calls, you suddenly know a lot more about their likely hand strength than they know about yours. You can weigh up your own holdings against that action, and you're not guessing blindly the way the small blind or under the gun has to. They're making decisions with almost no information. You, on the other hand, get a full round to process what everyone else wants to do. Late position gives you flexibility. Say you've got a decent hand, but not a monster. You might be able to call a small bet and see another card, or even raise if you sense weakness. Maybe you just check back and keep the pot manageable. If things get wild up front, you can fold without losing much. When you're in early position, you're always at risk of putting in chips only to get raised by someone who's still to act. That's how mistakes and overcommitments happen. But sitting last, you're rarely the one getting trapped. You're the one setting the traps. It's important to see that this edge is magnified by the sheer number of players in these bomb pots. The more people in the hand, the more likely someone's going to make a move you can react to, and the more information you gather before acting. In these games, the small blind is always at a disadvantage, forced to play every street first, never really knowing what's coming. Late position is where you get to be the one in control, using what you've learned to avoid costly mistakes and spot your best opportunities. There's another layer to this advantage, and that's how you can use your position to control when and how you apply pressure. Sometimes the best play isn't to bet right away, but to hold back and wait until later streets. This is where delayed aggression comes in. Instead of firing off a bet on the flop, you might check back and see what happens on the turn. By waiting, you let your opponents show more of their intentions. Maybe they'll bet into you on the turn, revealing the strength or weakness of their hands. Maybe they'll keep checking, showing they're not interested in building a big pot. This patience lets you gather more information before committing chips. If you spot weakness, you can pounce with a raise or a bet, and often you'll find your opponents folding weaker hands or calling you with worse. If you see signs of real strength, you can back off before you get drawn too far into a losing situation. Delayed aggression isn't just about bluffing, either. Sometimes it lets you get value from hands that might have been too thin to bet on earlier streets. You can wait until you're more certain your hand is good, then go for the value bet when your opponent is less likely to have a strong response. In these 1-3 live bomb pots, delayed aggression is especially powerful because the pot is already large from all those antes. Players are tempted to stab at the pot with weak holdings, hoping everyone else will fold. When you're last to act, you can wait to see who takes a shot. If the action checks to you and the board is dynamic, you might check and see if someone tries to steal it on the turn. If they do, you can raise, representing real strength, and force them to make a tough decision. This push and pull happens a lot in double board bomb pots, where you're weighing value on two separate boards at once. Acting last lets you choose whether to thin the field or keep more players in, depending on what you see and what you want. There's also a big reduction in risk when you hold back your aggression. By not building the pot too early, you avoid blowing up the size of the pot when your hand is still vulnerable. You're less likely to run into a stronger hand because you get to see how serious your opponents are before you commit more chips. If the flop checks around and you see a safe turn, you might choose that moment to start betting, knowing you've dodged some of the biggest threats. Of course, sometimes the best play from late position is no play at all. That's where check-back discipline comes in. There are plenty of times in these bomb pots when you'll have a marginal hand, maybe a weak pair, or a draw that's not quite strong enough to bet. When you're last to act, you can check back instead of betting. This keeps the pot smaller and lets you see another card without risking more chips. It's a way of realizing your equity efficiently. You're giving yourself a chance to improve without taking on extra risk. Disciplined checkbacks also keep you from getting trapped. If you bet and someone check raises, you might be forced to fold a hand that could have drawn out for cheap. By checking, you avoid putting yourself in that spot. You also make life harder for your opponents. When you check back, you're not giving away information about your hand strength. They have to guess what you might have, and sometimes they'll make mistakes on later streets, either by betting into you with a weak hand or by missing value with a strong one. In these multi-way pots, especially in live settings, check-back discipline helps you gather more information before making any big decisions. When you see several players checking to you on the flop or turn, and you check back, you get to watch what happens on the next street. Maybe someone shows sudden interest, or maybe everyone stays passive. Either way, you're getting another round of information. That makes your next decision much easier. Pot control is a big part of this. If you're in a pot limit bomb pot with a bunch of players, you don't want to end up with all your chips in the middle on a marginal hand. By checking back, you keep your stack flexible. You're not forced into tough spots on later streets, and you can still play for value if the situation improves. In double board bomb pots, sometimes you'll see a player lead out on one board, then check the turn. If you're in position, you can decide whether to take the initiative or keep checking, always with the advantage of seeing what they do first. So when you're in late position in these live bomb pots, you're playing with more information than anyone else at the table. You're making your decisions after seeing everyone else's intentions. You can use delayed aggression to strike at the right moment, and you can use check-back discipline to keep yourself out of trouble. Both of these tools work best when you're acting last, and both help you avoid the mistakes that catch players out of position. By putting yourself in the seat where you get to see the most, you give yourself the best chance to control the pot, realize your equity, and take advantage of the chaos that makes bomb pots so much fun to play. Take your time in these spots. Let the action come to you, and use the information you gather to guide your next move. The more you practice this, the more natural it'll feel to wait, watch, and pick your spots. That patience and awareness is what separates the player who survives the bomb pot chaos from the one who gets swept away. Let the game unfold, and trust that acting last gives you the best view in the house. Chapter 11. Emotional Control in High Variance Spots. You know, when you sit down for a session that includes bomb pots, you can almost feel the tension shift in the room. People get a little more alert. There's this nervous anticipation, because everyone knows the swings in these pots can be wild. You might have noticed how often you end up splitting pots or getting quartered, especially in these 5-card double board games. That feeling, when you think you've scooped a huge one only to realize you're taking home just a sliver, can really get under your skin. It's totally normal to feel that sting. Maybe you flopped what felt like a monster, put in a bunch of chips, and then at showdown, you're just splitting things up, or even worse, taking a fraction of the pot while someone else with the same nut hand has a better backup. In bomb pot formats, that's just part of the terrain. The structure almost encourages these outcomes, since so many hands see the flop and the boards are often coordinated. Everybody's drawing to similar nuts, and when the dust settles, there's a real chance you're walking away with less than you expected. That frustration is real, but it's important to remember it's not a mark against your play or your preparation. Getting quartered or splitting after heavy investment doesn't mean you misplayed the hand or missed something crucial. It's a function of the format itself. When you see these results as routine, just standard features of bomb pots, it gets easier to move on without dragging that disappointment into the next hand. One thing that can help is building a little routine for yourself. Some players take a slow breath, stack their chips carefully, or even just count to 3 in their head before the next hand begins. These small actions can serve as a mental reset, letting you acknowledge the outcome without letting it color your thinking. You're still in the game, still making decisions, and you want to be ready for whatever comes next, rather than stuck replaying what just happened. Now, even with all that in mind, it's easy to slip into revenge mode. You know the feeling. Maybe you just got quartered for what felt like the 10th time this session, and you catch yourself thinking, I'm getting my chips back right now. Suddenly you're looking for spots to jam the pot, maybe pushing the action with hands you'd usually fold, or trying to outplay opponents you feel owe you something. This is where bomb pots can really test your discipline. That urge to chase losses, or get even, can lead to oversized bets and aggressive plays that aren't grounded in good strategy. In these bomb pot formats, especially, this kind of tilt can get expensive quickly. You might find yourself over-bluffing, raising hands that have no business in big pots, or just playing way too many hands in a row. These are all signs that frustration's steering the ship instead of your process. Recognizing those triggers is key. If you notice your heart rate picking up, or you feel yourself itching to raise just for the sake of taking control, that's a signal. Sometimes the best move is to take a short break. Step away from the table, even if it's just for a couple of hands. If you're online, close your eyes, stand up, grab a glass of water. Another good trick is reviewing the hand that set you off. Look at it with a clear mind and ask yourself if you made the right decisions, regardless of the outcome. That helps shift your focus back to process, instead of payback. It's easy to forget, but nobody at the table is responsible for your losses or your luck. The game just plays out the way it plays out. When you let revenge aggression take over, you're giving up your edge. You start playing their game instead of your own, and that's when mistakes compound. The discipline to pause, reset, and stick to your plan is what separates steady winners from those who ride the roller coaster until they crash. There's another piece to this, and that's keeping your eyes on the long run. Bomb pots are built for variance. With so many players in each pot, and so much money in the middle, the short-term swings can be all over the map. You might play perfectly for an hour, and still end up down, or make a mistake and get bailed out by the river. If you focus too much on the outcome of each individual hand, you'll drive yourself crazy. Instead, you want to evaluate your decisions over many sessions, not just one. When you look at your results over hundreds or even thousands of bomb pots, patterns start to emerge. That's when you see the value of making the right decisions over and over, even if the results don't show up right away. The process is what you can control, and it's the only thing that matters in the long run. Tracking your results can help with this. Not just how much you won or lost in one night, but how you played certain spots, where you stuck to your plan, and where you let frustration creep in. Over a big enough sample size, you'll see that the edge comes from discipline and consistency, not from chasing every pot or getting even after a loss. Your bankroll management plays a huge role too. Keeping your stakes in line with your comfort level lets you weather the swings without feeling desperate to recover every downswing in one shot. When variance hits hard, it helps to remind yourself you're in it for the long haul. The swings that feel huge in the moment shrink down when you look at the bigger picture. Each bomb pot is just one step in a much longer journey, and the players who keep their cool, who stay focused on the process and not the outcome, are the ones who come out ahead over time. So as you keep playing these formats, try to bring that calm, methodical approach to every hand. Accept the splits and the quarterings as just part of the deal. Watch out for that urge to get even, and give yourself permission to step back when you need to. Trust that your edge will show up if you keep making good decisions and managing your bankroll with care. There's always going to be another bomb pot. The next hand is just a few seconds away, and with a little distance from the chaos, you'll find it easier to stay present, make sharp choices, and enjoy the game for what it is. When you look back after 100 sessions, you'll see that emotional control is what kept you steady through the storms. Let that be your anchor every time things get wild. Chapter 12. Integrating the framework. Let's take a breath before the next hand starts. When you're sitting in a live 1-3 bomb pot, there's always a rush of energy as the cards hit the felt, and everyone tosses in their ante. That's the moment to pause. Before you even touch your chips, you'll want to run through a checklist in your mind. This habit slows everything down and keeps you grounded, no matter how wild the table feels. Start by looking at both boards if you're in a double board format. Take a few seconds to really see the texture on each flop. Are they coordinated with straights and flushes possible, or are they dry and disconnected? This first look sets the stage for every decision you'll make. You're not just glancing, you're reading the story. Those boards are telling. Next, think about your stack size in relation to the pot. In bomb pots, the ante builds a big pot right away. Your stack depth compared to that pot size matters a lot. If you're deep, you'll have more room to maneuver. If you're short, every bet means more. This part of the checklist helps you decide how committed you might be when the chips start flying. Now, check the betting structure. Pot limit and no limit bomb. Pots play differently. Pot limit keeps the bets in check, but no limit means someone can shove a mountain of chips at any time. Before you act, know which game you're in. That knowledge shapes your risk and changes how you'll handle pressure. After you've taken in the board and your stack, ask yourself about scoop potential. In double board bomb pots, you only scoop if you win both boards. If your hand is strong on just one board but weak on the other, you're likely headed for a chop. That changes everything about how you value your hand. Think about your chance to win both boards, not just one, before you put chips in. Redraws are next. Look for ways your hand can improve on future streets. Do you have draws that could become strong-made hands by the river? Are there cards that could turn your holding from decent to dominant? This part of the checklist keeps you from playing passively, when there's still room for your hand to grow. Through all these steps, make folding a real option. Disciplined folding is a cornerstone of bomb pot play. If your hand doesn't measure up against the full range of possible holdings, let it go. Folding early keeps you from getting wrapped up in big pots with weak equity. It's not weakness, it's method. What you're building here is a repeatable, calming routine. Each time you pause and run down this checklist, you're protecting yourself from impulsive decisions. It's easy to get swept up in the action, but this process brings you back to center. The more you use it, the more natural it feels, and the less you'll find yourself regretting rushed calls or wild bluffs. When you move into the action after the ante, that double board can feel overwhelming. But there's a sequence you can use every time. Start by asking yourself how your hand stacks up on each board, one at a time. Remember, in these bomb pots, the small blind acts first after both flops are dealt. You want to know on each board how often your holding is likely to be best against all the other hands out there. Pot allocation gets split down the middle in these games, half the pot to the winner of each board. Scooping both is where the real money comes from, so your first job is figuring out if you're in position to take it all, or if you're just fighting for half. If your hand is only good on one board, you'll want to be careful about how much you're willing to call or bet. Too many players overvalue a single strong hand and forget they're only playing for half the pot. Redraws are a big part of this. Look at each board and count your outs to improve. Maybe you've got a flush draw on one flop and a straight draw on the other. Think about what turn and river cards will help you, and what cards might help your opponents. In double board bomb pots, remember that each board gets its own turn and river. After both flops are dealt, there are still 4 more community cards to come. Each of those cards can shift the equities on both boards, so stay open to how things can change as the hand develops. Stack to pot ratio, or SPR, is another piece you can't ignore. Because the aunties make the pots so big right away, you'll often find yourself with a small SPR. That means decisions get bigger, faster, and there's less room to maneuver after the flop. When you're evaluating hands, be aware of how much you've got behind compared to the pot, and don't trap yourself with awkward stack sizes. Think in terms of frequency, not certainty. Ask yourself how often your hand is likely to be ahead on each board, and how future cards might change that. Some runouts will strengthen your position, others will turn the tables. You're always working with probabilities, not guarantees. All of this comes together into a calm, stepwise breakdown. You're not looking for shortcuts or gut feelings. You're methodically weighing equity, scoop chances, redraws, stack depth, and betting structure on both boards, every hand. This kind of discipline keeps you from tilting when a chop slips away, or when a river card spoils your scoop. No-limit bomb pots add a whole new layer of pressure. Bet sizes can explode, and the threat of an all-in hangs in the air from the start. The adjustment sequence here is about recalibrating your risk. You need to know before you act what you're willing to commit and what hands are worth risking it all. Because no limit allows for massive bets, your commitment threshold has to adjust. If you're facing a big shove and your stack is just a little more than the pot, you need to be clear about whether your hand is strong enough to call off. The ante-built pot makes these spots common, so prepare for them before you act. Betting with the absolute nuts takes on even more importance in these spots. If you've got the best possible hand on both boards, don't slow play. Protect your equity and go for value. The risk of letting someone catch up is too high when stacks can go in at any time. Checking versus betting becomes a more nuanced decision in no-limit bomb pots. Sometimes you'll want to control the pot size with a check. Other times you'll want to bet big to charge draws or deny equity. This choice depends on your hand strength now and how you expect the board to develop. Keep asking yourself if the risk matches the reward. Through all of this, emotional detachment is your anchor. The swings in no-limit bomb pots can be wild. Pots balloon, stacks vanish, and it's easy to get caught up in the moment. But if you stick to your checklist and work through your evaluation sequence, you'll keep your decisions grounded in logic instead of emotion. There's no magic formula that makes bomb pots simple. You're always balancing risk, reward, and the unknown. But by slowing down, running your checklist, and staying detached from the outcome, you give yourself the best shot at long-term success. Every decision becomes a step on familiar ground, even when the cards and the stakes feel anything but steady. So the next time you're in a 1-3 bomb pot, take that extra breath. Let the table swirl around you, but stay calm in your process. You've built a routine, step by step, that lets you navigate the chaos with discipline and confidence. You're not just playing the cards, you're playing with structure, patience and clarity, one decision at a time.